Great.
Okay, good.
And go.
All right, cool. So, why am I here today? Our heart and our goal is to help your athletes to not be injured. That's our number one goal. As a physical therapist, my job has traditionally been to put people back together after they're hurt. But one of the biggest challenges that I face, the biggest frustrations that I have, is watching my kids compete in sports and seeing their teammates walking around in walking boots and being on the sideline not able to compete. Okay, so another thing for the mental health issue is not being able to perform, feeling like they're good enough, their body's breaking down, which at their age it shouldn't be. But there's a lot of things that go into that, but I want to kind of talk about how can we prevent that as much as we can as coaches, as parents, and I can help you with what to do after that, but my primary goal is to make sure that they don't have to see me, okay? So I want to kind of start off so we get on the same page with terms. What would you guys say to what is a muscle?
Thing in your body that moves.
Yes. It's the only soft tissue that actually contracts. Okay, so ligaments, bones, tendons, none of that contracts. The muscle contracts, okay? So the purpose for the muscle to contract is to either move, so move my hand towards my shoulder by contracting my bicep. It contracts, everything moves. Or the other goal is to stabilize. And so for that we need two sides of that joint, bicep, tricep, both working together. Now it's stable, now it can't move, okay? So those are the two ways the muscle works. So if that's what the muscle does, then I'll ask you, is stretching good or bad?
Yes.
I hope it's good.
Good and bad, okay, okay. What if my statement to you was the worst thing that you can do as an athlete before you perform a sport is to stretch?
Like that.
I would tell me
Stretching
more.
and
Be a little alarming, right? That's against everything that we've ever heard. So we're going to kind of talk about some stuff that the whole fitness world is kind of against, and I make some cringes whenever I get to speak or kind of talk to my clients about it. What I'd like to do is prove it to you. Is anybody willing to come up and just do a quick demonstration with me?
Mac. I vote for Mac.
Yeah, we're voting next.
Come on
I vote
up.
for Mac.
I got an arthritic, yeah. Don't gonna be a little too crazy with it.
All right. No major issues. No
I just got bad head.
those pain in it. Okay. All right. So lay on your back. All right. So you're gonna let me move you, and then I am going to just do a quick little test to test your strength on that side, and just see if everything's firing. Okay.
I'm letting you.
All right. Don't let me push down towards the table. Good. And don't let me push down towards the table. Good. No issue with that, right?
No.
Easy. Flip over on your belly. So we're going to stretch his left leg. So typically people will hold the stretch anywhere between, 15, 30 seconds. We're going to do 10. So tell me when you kind of feel the stretch. Feel that there?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. We're going to hold that about 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, flip back over. So we're going to check the side that we didn't test.
Okay.
Don't let me push down. Beautiful. Now we're going to check this side. Don't let me push down. Okay, don't let me push down. How does that feel now?
Yeah, definitely higher.
Okay. Shoulders coming up off, like everything's compensating to try to help that muscle that didn't work. We stretch for 10 seconds, right? Let's do it one more time. Don't let me push down. So same pressure. Yes?
Yeah,
Harder on that side, yes?
right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So just 10 seconds of elongating that tissue, we've caused neuromuscular inhibition. It's not a test, you guys don't have to remember that kind of stuff. But all that is saying is when the nerve and the muscle come together, there's a junction. That's where they communicate. If the nerve is not communicating to the muscle, it's not able to fire at the same strength. He didn't lose all strength, but he dropped about 30% is what the average is. Don't push down. Feel better?
Yeah.
So we turn it back on. I'm not going to leave you walking out of here with neuromuscular inhibition in your leg. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Okay?
Good job.
So very quickly we can show what that looks like, okay? Same thing that happens with foam rolling, the Theragun, like all these different gadgets that we've come up with to relax the muscle. But what we talked about before, the job of the muscle is not to be relaxed. An off muscle doesn't do anything, an on muscle does. So when we go to contract, we'll go back to the elbow demonstration. If you are bringing your hand towards your shoulder, you need the bicep to work. That doesn't mean the tricep is off. That means the tricep is just firing less, okay? So this starts to go, this needs to go less so that we don't have gridlock and nothing's able to move, okay? So when people say, I've got a really tight hamstring, the worst thing that you can do is go try to stretch that hamstring because it's trying to work for something else that's not working. You saw Mac's shoulder lift up, so his abs, his hip flexors up in his belly started to work because his quad muscle was no longer working, okay? So our bodies are brilliantly made, as we all know, by a divine creator, that when something's not working, everything else is gonna try to make it happen, okay? So when the kids are complaining that my hamstring is tight, my quad is tight, we have to be able to figure out, okay, it's not a quad problem if the quad is tight, or if we get a hamstring pull, it's not a hamstring problem, it's something else that caused that to overwork, okay? I'm not asking you guys to figure that out, but what I wanna give you is a really good warm-up so that we're not going into practice, we're not going into the game with neuromuscular inhibition, okay? Our job is then, if we have an ankle sprain, we have a hamstring pull, something like that is gonna happen, we can get them back on the field. A lot of places that will bring you in to do the conventional model, your athletic trainers that are with most of the schools, your PTs that are connected to the hospitals, what they're gonna do is ice, rest, elevation, some compression, and some stretching, which is gonna keep them off the field for even longer. And so when I go to cross-country meets and everybody's wearing these boots, their foot's not moving, they're not using those muscles, we're causing more problems, a lot of compensations with how they're walking, setting up for more failure, and they're gonna be off the field for even longer. And the worst thing that I see in a very short high school period is to have somebody not able to compete, okay? Does that make sense so far? A lot of information. Okay, so what my goal is to show you guys how to warm up properly so that we are doing isometrics to get things working. So an isometric is a contraction of a muscle. So passive stretching is what we did with Mac. That's what I don't want anybody to do. But I'm gonna give you kind of a general warm up that you're gonna be able to utilize and some cool down exercises so that these exercises can be done to properly get everything working. Kind of watch the animal kingdom, they've got to figure it out still. Dog gets up in the morning, downward dog, upward dog, you get a nice isometric contraction. That's not a stretch, everything's just holding, and it gets everything turned back on. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys kind of pass these around. So these are some different exercises and some warm-up things. They're kind of based for really anything. I can get a little bit more detailed. I don't know if I have enough for everybody. I wasn't sure how
I don't
many
need
people
one.
we're gonna see here.
And I can make more copies tomorrow, especially volleyball people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
get them in the hands of the people that need them
Mhm.
earlier,
Yes,
and then we can
I'll see you
always
guys tomorrow with,
make some extra copies.
some extra.
So injuries are always gonna happen when there's neuromuscular injury. There's a recipe, like there is for a cake, there's a recipe for injury. The one thing that we have control over is there's always gonna be gravity, there's always gonna be movement. The one thing we have control over is that neuromuscular inhibition. So making sure that the muscles are working properly and they're all working around the joint. So when I kind of talk about that, one of the things that I like to talk about is the football team. I know we don't have football here, but we kind of understands if you've got a left tackle, the left tackle is the line, and they're blocking the defense from getting to the quarterback. If that guy goes down, obviously we would replace him, but if he wasn't in, who picks up when somebody gets by that tackle? The running back generally does, right? He steps up and he makes that block. A lot of the time he can do it, but he's not gonna be able to do it for a long time because he's a running back. He's not built for blocking this huge defensive lineman, linebacker. So he can make that block several times, but at some point he's gonna wear down, he's gonna get hurt, and then the the worst thing that happens, aside from getting hurt, not talking about the person, is now the quarterback's getting hit. Okay, and that's going to end any sort of play that you have. You're not going to be able to advance the ball anymore, and he's probably going to get hurt too. So just like what's going on with your body, if your abs are not firing properly, your hamstrings are probably going to try to kick in and try to pick up that slack. Now they're overworking because they're not doing their job. They're the running back, and they're trying to do what the lineman is doing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So on there's some exercises on there. I'm going to send Bernice a link to that particular page that will also have videos that are linked to each one of those exercises. If there's a couple, I know some of the A skips, B skips, maybe not as familiar. They're all on YouTube, you can find them, but I'll try to send that out so then it has us instructing those and kind of what it's looking for, but especially for your running athletes, the A skips and B skips are super important to get them working and kind of naturally develop a good running pattern. We don't like to try to fit people into molds of you've got to move this way. We want to move your body in the best way that it can move. Okay?
So, question, you just start cold and start doing these items?
So if you kind of work down the list,
Yeah.
Yep, it's from a cold point, but you're working through those in the slower movements, and by the end, now we're picking up some of the cardio stuff.
So how much time
So it shouldn't take you more than 6 to 8 minutes, just depending on how coordinated the team is, how much they're working together. So it can kind of build some of that, the working as a team. And so I forget again, what do you coach?
Basketball.
Basketball. So if you're going sideline to sideline,
Yeah.
you're kind of going down, you'll do the stationary exercises first, and then you might be doing the ones cross court. And so lunge with a twist would be going down this way, and then you might come back and do kind of a crossover squat going back the other way. And so just down and back. So that
We've
way
done,
movement.
wouldn't you say,
Yeah,
90% of these? The
Most-
ones at the bottom, the A skip, I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah,
but
and
I
so
think
you
I
kind
know.
of do one out one way and one out the other way.
Yeah.
So it's just a little bit of a coordination thing, but most of the exercises are pretty familiar with the coaches. It's eliminating some of the passive stretching things and hold those kinds of things. So yoga, I think, is actually pretty good for the most part, but there are some elements of yoga that are passive stretching, and they're holding those muscles for a period of 15 to 30 seconds, and that's what we do not want to do, is create that imbalance.
We have them run a couple of laps prior to starting our dynamic stretching.
Sure.
Is that recommended, or do the dynamic stretching first?
I'd probably start off with some of the dynamic stretching. Sometimes you can kind of just get that heart rate up with a little bit of running. So a light jog is not contraindicated. That'll be
Okay.
totally fine.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions on that stuff?
What is the problem with, like the Theragun, the foam rolling or massaging?
Sure. So they're deformation of the muscle tissue. So
Okay.
similar to the stretching. You can do all of those kinds of demonstrations. Stretching is actually probably, since people don't stretch as intensely, it causes the least amount of neuromuscular inhibition and weakness of the muscle, if you will. And so, if you talk to a lot of people, well, I stretch, but I like to foam roll because I feel even better release of them. Right, so if stretching does that, then how much more is foam rolling going to be doing? So it's changing the elasticity of the muscle. If you think about a rubber band, if you stretch it over and over, it gets looser and looser and looser. That's the last thing that we want a muscle to be doing.
Is that why chiropractors do like a deep pressure for a period of time before they do an adjustment? Is to get that muscle not so
Sometimes,
tense?
yeah, I don't know all of their strategies.
Okay.
Some of their stuff will cause inhibition. Some of it doesn't. It just depends
Okay.
on what their approach is and what they're looking at. So what this is based on is science. And I learned back in PT school 20 some years ago, they told us do not passive stretch because the studies show it doesn't have long-term effects. Then I got out in the clinic and my clinical instructor said, I need you to stretch this guy's hamstrings. But it says it doesn't work. Well, we don't know what else to do. Now we have the tools to figure out this is what it does do. And so even back then we knew, but we didn't have the strategy. So we use the 180 system, and so it attempts to like I did with Mac, turn those muscles back on in strategic points. So when we assess an athlete that has been injured, or we're just assessing them for performance, we are going through each muscle group and testing that. If it works, great, we move on to the next one. If it doesn't, then we turn it on.
So you're saying all these things right here will stretch, not, maybe that's not what I want to say, stretch, because you said don't stretch.
Prepare.
Prepare, there you
Prepare.
go, all the muscles.
That's right.
So if a kid comes up to me and like, my calves are killing me, you know, don't tell them to stretch, something along here,
I would have them go through that warm up. Yep.
okay,
And decrease. There's an endurance issue that they're dealing with.
okay.
And so if you're working with volleyball and they're jumping constantly, what we like to do is look at what their form is. What does that form look like when they're jumping? And so we just had a young lady in today for her first assessment she was a volleyball player, back was killing her, and so we had her go through our screening process of, different things. Could she reach down and touch the floor? And she was like, here, so something was holding, and asked her to do a squat, and it was like all over the place with their legs. 20 minutes later, after we did everything, then she's knees out, she's squatting down to the floor like that. So we brought back that control, standing on one foot. You might even kind of test that and say, all right, stand on one foot. And if her knee's dropping in like this, which repetitive jumping up and down, if they're collapsing at those knees, we know we've got a hip issue. So for girls in their sports, we know there's a increasing prevalence for ACL injuries. And we just as marked, well, it's the Q angle for girls, and it's just gonna happen. It didn't used to happen. Their bodies haven't changed that much. There's a lot of different factors. There's nutrition, there's sleep, there's all kinds of things, but it's also what's going on with their body. Can we put them in the right place? We're stretching them more. They're playing for 11 months out of the year instead of 3 and then a different sport. So those kinds of things. But you can kind of look at what those mechanics look like, and if there's a kid that's just like, she's not moving right, he's not moving quite right, I ask him to do a squat, I ask him to bend over and touch his toes, and he's either nowhere near his toes, or the legs are all over the place, standing on one foot's a super big deal, then it could be a good referral just for us to get a look at him before an injury really happens. But those are just some screening things you guys can be looking at. You can always contact me and say, hey, I've got a kid that's really dealing with this, is there anything that we can do? My goal is not here to get clients, my goal is here to help you guys and help your kids stay on the court, but if they do get hurt, then we can help them stay on the court.
Josh, does the order of these make a difference?
I kind of set them up to be kind of less movement, progressing to more higher intensity, and
Okay.
so they do kind of help with that. You can make some modifications if it's just space or something like that, but
Okay.
generally they help that way.
Okay.
Now, what's the thinking at halftime? Most of us go in, we drink too much fluids,
Yep.
we come out late, sometimes because coaches have a tendency to
Like to talk.
talk a lot at halftime. Or we lose track of the clock or whatever reason, but kids I'm just wondering, is there
Yeah.
anybody doing something with halftime because there's potential for injury if you don't warm up after
Sure.
after going hard?
That's a great thought. And
Yeah.
so my preference is we do our cool down. We kind of get together as a team, having an idea that we have 5 minutes on the clock. That when we get out there, we're not going to go out there and just do lazy shoot arounds. We're going to go through the key components of some of these exercises. We don't do all of them, but some of the moving ones that we do those as a team, so we're turning everything back on us after we just sat, kind of rested. So the baseball team that I work with, what they do is they warm up as a team before the game, and especially the pitchers, they come after they throw, they come off and they do some band exercises they're working on to get their arms ready. So it's 5 of each of the exercises, and then they're done and they're ready to go back out. When they get into the batting circle for before they hit, then they do 3 different exercises in the warm-up circle to get them ready for the torque and the twisting that they're going to need to their body. And so it's just kind of that constant, this is now my mindset. So my athletes that are coming in, if they've been injured, then I'm asking them to do these exercises 4 or 5 times a day. And they're short. I try to stay between a 5 and a 7 minute length of time to do their exercises. so that they're able to turn those muscles back on. And at first, they're waiting every 2 hours, and they're doing them every 2 hours because the endurance of those muscles in the injured areas can only last so long. And then we start to decrease them as their endurance starts to pick up, as their strength builds. But you've got athletes that are really pushing themselves to the full extent, and then they take that break at halftime. I think it'd be a great time to kind of do some stuff. And if a kid comes out of the game and he's sore or he's tired, he might go behind the bench and just do a couple, and then jump back out.
Well, the same would be if you had a kid that got warmed up and you didn't play him in the first quarter.
Right.
And you put him in the middle of the second
he's cold.
quarter. He's been sitting there cold, stone, doing nothing. And now we all do it. We just say, okay, get him for.
Yeah.
And
And so, let me talk about that for 1 second. The lunge with the twist, the low lunge with the twist, those and some deep squats. If you warmed up and then they sat on the bench for the whole first quarter and then they got up and they knew to do 2 of these just to kind of get themselves warmed up, do some deep squats, you've hit a lot of the things because you're getting rotation, you're getting hip and knee flexion and ankle flexion all the way down. Now they can go out and they've at least prepared themselves again. They're high school kids in their teens. They don't turn off nearly as fast as some of us would. You know, we sit there for 15 minutes and we're gonna take quite a bit longer to get warmed up again. So they're not gonna take very long. So
yeah, we try to tell a kid that goes in a game, as soon as you catch it, don't shoot it. Because, you know,
Why is
you've been
that?
sitting there,
Right.
and of course, well, coach, I was open. Well, of course you were open. Don't shoot it, you know, because you've got to get warmed up a little bit. Go up and down the court a few times.
It depends, right.
How long does it take for like a teenager in high school to cool down before they need some reactivation?
It just depends, because inhibition can come from a stretching or something like that, deformation of the muscle, or it can come from fatigue or too much rest. And so, if we rest too long, we sit on our glutes, we're probably gonna cause a glute inhibition, so we get up and we start to move. I mean, we've all done it, get up and kind of stretch, and we call it stretching, but it's not, it's an isometric, you're squeezing your glutes, you're moving your body, that turns everything back on. And so these kids, for the most part, they're gonna be pretty good with that.
So it's pretty immediate for turning things back on.
You can do it really quick.
Okay.
Right. So it took me all of 3 seconds to turn Max hip flexor back on. It's not difficult. It's just intention.
But you massaged or did something to his leg.
It's magic.
Right.
Do you?
So, I mean, what's equivalent to that? A deep
It's
squat?
an isometric. Yep. It's moving. So we want to prepare muscles in a full range of motion. And so when I do that lunge, I want that knee coming over my toes, and if I'll send you the video so you can hear me talking about it. So they're twisting, they're rotating, but I have my knee way over my toe. And a lot of fitness right now, we hear, oh, don't let your knee go over your toe with a squat. That's incorrect, because now it's impossible to get into a full squat if you're keeping your knee back behind your toes. All your weight's back on your heel.
Thank you.
But if you're coming forward,
I always thought I was doing something wrong. I'm like, my knees, did they have
coming
to go over
forward,
the
That's
what we
why
want
I
to
do
be doing
squats.
is taking this joint into full range of motion.
Quit trying.
Because we want to develop, we call it mostrability, is the term we've come up with, is motion, strength, and stability, want it all together. And so if this is how you're preparing full range of motion, then when you get in the game and you do this, you're not pulling the muscle anymore, because you've prepped yourself into going to full range of motion. And so that's what we're always trying to create, is stability in that full range of motion. If we only warm up like this, and then we get in the game and we get hit and we're falling over and maybe now we go here, that's when knee injuries happen. That's when muscle pulls happen, because we haven't prepared in that full range of motion. And so that's what this list is looking for, is full trunk rotation, full hip flexion, full knee flexion.
What about muscle cramping? Does this help with muscle cramping?
It can. I mean, there's a few different components of that. There's proper hydration, and not during the game hydration as much as before. So nutrition, hydration, all go into that. But this can help with that. So a lot of times I'll see, you'll be watching college or professional athletes, and they get the muscle cramp and they're immediately stretching it. I would be working the opposite muscle to strengthen that muscle. So we have hamstrings, you know, you look at the quadrant, abs is what I'd be trying to turn on, or glutes.
Okay.
Kind of the opposite side of that joint that we need to be working.
Would you modify this list for any of the different sports, for the most part, or?
It's kind of all-inclusive. There's times that I might add a couple things if it's a heavy overhead, but because I knew we had volleyball, I wanted a lot of overhead stuff in there. So baseball pitchers, I'll add some band work because they're throwing it crazy amounts of
Right.
torque.
Right.
Volleyball's still pretty good, but the ball at least slows it down, so it's not as much of a rotator cuff sport. So sometimes quarterbacks, we might do a couple extra things, but for the most part, it covers most things.
Okay.
Soccer's gonna be covered through there.
And it says 10 to 15 yards each, meaning, are those the movement ones? You're
Yeah.
talking-
Yeah.
That's how far you should be.
Right,
moving?
so sideline to sideline, or if it's on a basketball court, or it's on a baseball field, to be sideline to like second base, you know, whatever's easiest for your typical warm-up pattern. Volleyball, you know, sideline to sideline would work just fine. Soccer, you know, just kind of picking probably sideline to midfield, so it's not too far. And you're getting fatigued by doing too many, but.
This question has nothing to do with anything we could use, but since we have you,
Yes.
years ago, and I'm not gonna say I was around, but when these baseball pitchers used to pitch 15 innings, they pitched 9 innings, and they did it 20 times in a season, and today, they can't throw the ball 90 times in a game without being
Pitched
yanked out.
Yep.
So, those guys, you know, has anybody got names?
Bob
Some of you
Fuller.
older guys?
Bob Fuller.
There you go. Yeah, and the great older guys that were in the 20s and 30s, they threw like crazy. And what happened?
Money.
Is it the money,
Oh,
or is
yeah.
there a physical thing, or what's going on?
They don't make them like they used to, Phil.
I mean, we weren't, velocity wasn't as sought after, I think. I mean, it was sought after, but like, they weren't like, that was 94, that was 96,
Yeah.
that was, it was a different, I think it was a little bit different.
Well, they didn't have guns,
Yeah,
Right.
but they have clocked those guys,
yeah.
because they can do that digitally
Oh, yeah.
when the ball leaves. I saw a documentary on it, when the ball leaves their hand,
Yeah.
and they can measure it. And some of those old guys could really throw it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, is it, the injury thing is the reason, and that's why they did it? Money is the
I
reason?
think a lot of it's money, but there are more injuries because these guys are bigger and stronger,
Yeah.
but they're not necessarily training the right way. And so we've gotten in our own way. The animal kingdom's got to figure it out, where we're like, all right, let's stretch. I mean, we watch a baseball team, they stretch the heck out of these guys before they, so we're causing neuromuscular inhibition, so we're setting them up for injury.
Huh.
Athletes, you know, every time you have an inhibition, you're either causing an acute injury, so it's happening right now, or a chronic injury. So when you're pretty athletic, you can do a lot of this stuff and you're not getting hurt right away. So that's what, you know, I talk to people, well, I've stretched all my life and I don't get hurt. You will. It's gonna catch up to you at some point, but let's eliminate it for these high school kids so that they're not causing that problem later. Because we're able to adapt, we're compensating, so if I shut that bicep off, I'm gonna be able to figure it out because I'm pretty athletic. But, so for some of those guys, the size and muscle mass that's happening right now, they're creating such torque that the rotator cuff muscles just can't keep up. They're doing Tommy John surgery pre-starting a major league career just to make sure that doesn't happen,
Yeah.
which is insane.
They're having the surgery before they have the injury.
Preventative.
My goodness.
Same thing with ACL injuries. I mean, I don't remember those happening even in the 80s and 90s very
Right.
often, and now it seems like.
In the 80s and 90s, what do? We just went out and played.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
We
the guy
didn't
get
sit there
mad
and
if he took him
stretch
out and he had a full
the team
game
and all.
going and he couldn't get 9 innings in.
Right.
You wouldn't take the star out. Who was the guy down in Texas?
Yeah.
He pitched crazy numbers.
Nolan Ryan?
Yeah, Nolan Ryan. And he was a fireball.
Complete games all the time, and he threw over 90. Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think some of it's our over thought process. It's the nutrition of what's happening with the food right now, and there's not as much nutrients in it, so it's not as dense. And just the size of these guys, they're working out a ton, but they're not necessarily focusing on the right areas. They want to be able to throw as hard as they can, which means this. But if we don't work on the muscles, the rotator cuff that's keeps the arm from coming off the body, then that's what gets hurt for a lot of kids. For a lot of athletes is we don't have the deceleration abilities.
What were you telling me? You were giving me an example of the swimming coach and the number of
Yep.
injuries.
So we had a swim team that implemented this, and they got to the last few weeks of their program, and they had done a warm-up very similar to this, a couple extra things that were different for them because it wasn't as lower body intense and force. And they got to towards the end of the season, the coach called the PT colleague of mine and said, we don't have nearly as many of the shoulder injuries as we usually have. Usually I'm struggling to find kids to send to the conferences because we've got so many kids with shoulder. Nobody's hurt because they're doing these dynamic warm-ups. They're doing them right before they have their race. You know, it's a little bit different with that. It's more like track. With that is how it's set up, but they're doing their little routine right before they jump in the pool and go out and do their race. Sorry.
Do you have a position on stretching on off days when they're not gonna compete, it's just a rest day?
Pretty strong position. Don't ever do it.
Yep. So
These things can replace that. So there's a difference between tightness. So if you feel like your hamstring is tight and you can't get your knee straight versus stiffness. So if I was to tell you, all right, I need you to go race up a mountainside in the Rockies without all the guardrails and on that, and you're gonna race against somebody else and you gotta get up as fast as you can. Do you want a steering wheel that's real loose, like a 70s style Chevette, or do you want a German style really tight steering? You want it really tight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we want our muscles too. If they're loose because we've stretched them, then we don't have that control, that precision. So if I gotta turn 3/4 of the way around to get a 45-degree turn, I'm not feeling like I'm gonna go very fast on a mountain road. But if I turn it like this and I'm getting really precise steering, that's performance. And so that's what we're trying to set up as performance for athletes. We want muscles that are stiff with a full range of motion, not tight, limiting that motion. Does that make sense? But yeah, I haven't found any need to do any stretching, and so the adult clients that come in, they're like, I stretch every day, or I get a massage once a week, or whatever. Okay, go through this with me, go through my 3-4 week program of us working with you, and see, at the end of it, you can decide for yourself. And they come in, a lot of the times, guys will come in and be like, I've always had tight hamstrings since I was a kid, but I'm just not flexible. Okay, put them on the table, get them back up, they put their fingers to the floor. What'd you do to me? I said, well, I didn't stretch you. No, you didn't stretch me. I said, but if you want to go to the massage therapist, or if you want to stretch after we're done, you can, but everybody comes back and I don't feel like I need to anymore. I'm not tight. They're stiff.
We have 20 new clients from just this room.
Again, not my goal, but what
They
do we
were
guys
in
think?
Middleburg Heights.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you, well, you are talking to a room of high school coaches, but what would you tell every high school coach as far as strength? What should they do to prepare their athletes for their season? Other than, we've got you're talking, this is part of conditioning.
Sure it is.
What we're doing.
Yeah.
But, to avoid these injuries, to have kids strong for their sport, to have them prepared for their season. I know this is like turning a page. What would be your wish list for a high school coach? What they should do to prepare their kids for the season, as far as strength and conditioning?
Sure. It would be sport specific and looking at what other movements do they go through, and then see can they get through the full range of motion for the things that they're doing. And so we're going to work a lot on getting full mobility out of our ankles if we're doing like a field sport or a court sport where we're running around and there's the potential of landing on somebody's foot. And I've got a picture on my phone of a young lady that was doing our system, and she was a soccer player, and somebody snapped a picture of her landing on the side of her foot like this as she was striking the ball.
Without injury.
She didn't even know she did it.
Yeah.
We got a picture of it. It's incredible. It looks like it's a fracture,
Yep.
and she didn't even sprain it. because she had prepared herself to get into the full range of motion with strength and control. So her body still withheld that and was able to maintain that control.
So all body weight? You
So,
had coaches work with
My
all body-
preference is full body weight. I mean, we'll do, like, I would do bench press, I would do different things like that, but I would be working on grip strength, pull strength, working a lot of upper body, even for the female athletes, because it's super important for them. If you're doing cross country, we're still working upper body, but it might be more many reps depending on what your sport is. And so if it's more of a grind, like cross country's long endurance, then we're doing a lot more reps with lower weights. If we need quick power, basketball jumping, then we're gonna be doing some heavier squats. But I'm also gonna be looking at how can we get lots of transverse plane, which is rotation. How can we add rotation into our exercises? So it might be a farmer's carry, where we're carrying 30-pound dumbbells at a station during our conditioning, and we have one on this side, and we're doing lunges all the way across the gym and back. And so that way, we're building that strength up. For our girls, we're really working on that hip strength, especially, like, everybody's a little bit different, but I'd be looking at, okay, what can we see, how does our toe touch look? Okay, well, we need to strengthen some stuff, we need to look at some of that stuff if it's all terrible. What does our squat look like? Is that really wishy-washy? So now we want to be, banding across the knees so they push out and they hold there, and now we do our squats. And now we do some monster walks with a band on her knees, forward, backwards. If you've got that girl that cannot turn her leg out like that, she walks down the halls like this, then we got to be working on those muscles so that she's doing internally rotated monster walks, so we're activating the muscles to turn them on. So we'll go forward with a monster walk, backward with the monster walk, rotate out, forward with a monster walk. So it might not be this big strength and we're doing a bunch of dumbbell work, but we're trying to get full motion out of our joints. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It's a lot, and I mean, it's hard to go all encompassing on different things, but if we have the same kind of bands, then we can be strengthening with our core and rotating here. So I'm pulling a band apart. So I'm working on that trunk rotation as I'm doing lunges across the gym.
Do
So,
any of these require bands?
yeah.
Have you ever heard of the rubber band man?
Uh-huh. Yep, I've seen some of those. I know a client that goes over and works with him.
Because when you did that ankle sprain thing, he would stand on the height of that chair, jump off the chair and land with his ankle on the side, and he would not sprain his ankle.
I'm not gonna attempt to try that.
I mean, I've seen him do it. I bought the rubber bands when I saw him do it.
So,
I'll buy you 5 sets.
He's like
Does it
limping
jump
all
rope?
over his house.
Afterwards.
He was in
that one
camp
cost a
night
lot.
before he was out of years.
there's a trainer around
25
right now that
years ago.
does, he's called the rubber band man, but he loads these kids up with bands all over them.
Well, they're all different widths,
Yeah.
thicknesses.
Looks-
and
Just-
You got
looks
a
a little
platform and
gimmicky
you
to
load up. Yeah.
I'd rather just have you out there, doing plyometric type stuff, jumping onto a box, jumping off. So bleacher work, jump up on the bleachers, jump off, backwards, forward, sideways, jumping over things, sport specific training. So volleyball would be what I would be looking at there if they've got control. So we can't start doing the jumping stuff if they look like this when they're jumping and they're squatting. Their knees touch every time they jump up and they come down. Well, we're gonna have an injury. You put that kind of force on the inside of the knee, we're gonna tear something. So those are the things that I'm looking at to make sure, what's going on. But we screen everybody before, we screen everybody after to see how did that change. What's your toe touch look like? What does your squat look like? What's your single leg balance look like? Or your single leg squat? So that's what we do. Not that I'm expecting you guys to do, but you can start to kind of watch that and hopefully give you a little bit of an eye. Watch out for something that kid's probably gonna hurt.
How many jumps, in basketball, it's a limited, but volleyball, I would think, really does a lot more individual jumps for a hitter than, let's say, a basketball player would do in a game. But how many jumps is too many? Besides the fourth quarter when nobody,
Hitting fatigue.
yeah,
And so it depends on how you're trained.
yeah.
So if you trained like a volleyball player, you got a bunch of jumps. So I played college basketball, not because I was super athletic. I was athletic, but I wasn't great at it. But there wasn't a lot of guys in my school. So I was able to play basketball. I can say I played college basketball. But then we went to Division III and we started adding sports. We had a phenomenal volleyball program. And my last year of school, I didn't have that much to do. So I said, hey coach, can I just practice with you guys? He said, sure, come on. I couldn't jump or anything.
Yeah.
So I could never dunk the ball. My hands were small. I started playing volleyball and they had me a two-hitter. I'm just jumping all day. All of a sudden I could dunk the volleyball. It was like the practice and the repetition of that. First of all, it's just memory, motor learning, and then it's the strengthening too. But we didn't jump like that for all the years that I played basketball until I played 1 year of volleyball. Now I can jump.
At the end of practice, we probably have, 5, 6 guys that actually will wanna stay in the gym and do nothing but try to dunk the ball.
Right.
And half of them can't hit the ball onto the rim, but that doesn't mean they're not gonna jump up there and be dumb
We're
about
gonna
it.
keep trying, right. So, I mean, setting up some different drills, that they're just over on the wall with the ball, it's good rebounding drill too, that they're jumping up and touching the spot. And they're getting 15 jumps, and then they move to the next station, and the next guy comes in there. So repetitions is what it's all about, and you're just watching. If it starts to fall apart, then that's too many jumps for them. So everybody's a little bit different. Some guys can jump 100 times, and some guys can jump 10, and they're beat.
Yeah.
Depends on what they did coming into your training program. If they've been mostly doing video games, then they're not gonna do very many.
Well, they all do video games.
Yes.
Well,
We jump a lot in video games.
Yeah.
They're visualizing it.
Yeah,
When you're-
that's right.
When you're trying to push the kids and get in shape, when is it pushing them too far and risking injury, but also not wanting them to be wimpy?
yeah, so you've gotta condition it based on what that kid can do. So there's a really cool book out there that looked at, they measured heart rate. And this gym teacher would, as many gym teachers will do, you finish in the top percent, you get an A in my class, in the middle, you get a B, and the kids that come in last, well, they just barely pass. Well, they put heart rate monitors on these kids and they had them run the mile, and the kids that finished first, they looked at their heart rate and it barely peaked, because they were just in shape. And then they got the kids that were struggling and coming at the end, well, they were at their max heart rate levels. So
They're
actually,
working-
those
they're
two kids
working
were
hard,
working the
right.
hardest, but they're just out of shape.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to tell, you gotta kind of monitor them. Are you pushing them to that fatigue? Are they kind of protecting themselves? Is it, everyone's watching me and I'm overweight, and I'm jiggly, I don't wanna do that, so it's a mental game as much as it's physically. I don't have a great answer for you,
Okay.
but if you develop that relationship with them and you can get them to perform for you, then you can start to see, okay, what's going on. But if it's calling them out, hey, you're not working and they are working, you lost them. And so it's kind of getting to that point of, are you trying your best right now through a relationship without asking that question? Hey, you look like you're really working hard today. Great effort. You're gonna see, well, where are they gonna put it a little bit more for you the next time? So that's the challenge of coaching, is figuring out this kid needs this motivation and this kid needs this motivation. I get really hard on this kid, but I gotta befriend this kid, and that's the way they both move better. I don't know.
Some of the top
Long way to
programs
go.
have heart rate monitors, so they can, we're not there, obviously, but,
No, but
They have-
Bob would have about kids, they can check their own heart rate.
oh yeah,
You can do that, they're
A
good.
lot of them have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It all
The
depends.
watches,
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
They can do
so
it themselves.
if it's during your preseason stuff and they're doing a mile run, you might just have them take a look at
Yeah.
that. So you just kind of see how much did it change. It's not what their heart rate is at that moment, but did they go up by a percent? You can kind of read up on what the red zones are and the orange zones
Right.
are.
right?
From a, like an injury and muscle standpoint, is it better to work them out hard pre-practice, mid-practice, post-practice, when you're doing your learning stuff? Like if you're gonna just run them and just really push them, is it better to do it before, middle, or towards the end?
So from what I've read, is you gain more muscle memory when you're fatigued than you do prior. And so like at the beginning of practice, you don't do as many free throws because you're not fatigued. You do those at the end when you're just beat and you're spent, and you just did a bunch of line drills. So at the beginning of practice, you're not gonna go super hard, but you're gonna do your warm-ups, you're gonna work into stuff. That's where they're still a little bit more fresh mentally. And if you're doing middle school, then you might need to run them for 20 minutes and then they can actually hear you. So,
Hear that, Jordan?
Sorry, my boss is
Oh.
at work and I have no idea.
we did a Bible study at Grace, and I would work with the high school boys in the summer, and we do ultimate frisbee. And we go out and run them for an hour and a half, run it all over the field, and then we go back and do a Bible study. Well, then they could sit there and they could talk. And one day it was raining, we said, well, we're gonna skip frisbee, let's just do the Bible study. They were all over the place. They couldn't hear anything that
That's
was
what I
said.
do for the elementary.
And so just getting them fresh for their, so some running, some warm-up stuff, kind of gets them settled, and then we can talk strategy, and then we break into some drills. That's kind of how
So true.
I've always structured my practice sessions in that way, and then run them pretty hard, and then have them do a skill-intense exercise where we're just doing free throws. But I remember my coach in ninth grade, we dribbled with our left hand the whole practice, and we did left-handed layups for like a week. And we were so mad, because we wanted to shoot ball, we wanted to be SPN, we wanted to shoot three-pointers.
Was his name Phil Argento?
We crushed everybody with left-handed layups and one motion play. We could beat our varsity team because we were so solid by the end of our 10th grade season. It was incredible.
Yeah, the fourth quarter is the problem in basketball because now your legs go. And when your legs go, everything you shoot hits the front of the rim, which is a signal that you need to come out or quit shooting. But for some guys, the only way to get them to quit shooting is to have them sit next to you.
Because if the ball touches their hand, it's going up.
Well, I was open, coach.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, at half court, you were wide open. You should be, but you're not gonna make it, so nobody's gonna try you. So, I mean, in practice, if you can make practice harder than anything they're gonna experience at the game, that's the goal.
Yep.
Right?
You're gonna prepare 'em.
So if they've run 3 times as much as what they're gonna, then they get to the fourth quarter, they're still fresh.
right.
So it's hard to get the kids to that point. And I finally learned in college that I needed to make 100 shots a day outside of practice to actually be a good shooter.
That's music to his ear.
He's saying 500.
Yeah, I was gonna say, oh, yeah.
Speaking his language.
Yeah, practicing shooting didn't happen during practice. That was for learning how to play as a team. I needed to work on my skills outside of that.
I played for a guy in college, and we started practice every day for 4 years with 30 minutes of shooting. He had 7 managers in the stands charting you, because if you walked after the ball, you were not getting a certain number of shots, or you weren't pouring sweat when he met you at half court after 30 minutes, there was heck to be paid for. So, you know, he knew what you wanted out of you, and we had guys that didn't play a lot, they didn't wanna go out and shoot all that stuff. And they wanted to walk after the ball. Well, there is no walking.
Yep. Well, what you were talking about before I started was, you know, it was just the mentality. And, you know, that's exactly what my freshman coach preached was, we're gonna dribble left-handed
Right.
for.
Yeah, I try to get him
laps.
to just go home and do 5 minutes before you
Yeah.
get on the school bus or whatever.
It
Just
was
do
that.
5 minutes every morning.
Left-handed dribble, left-handed layups, right-handed layups, free throws, and now we start doing jump shots.
Yeah.
Because, guys, you're gonna be wide open on a 15-foot jump shot because you can't make it. So,
Yeah, there was an old coaching thing. It said you were four levels of play. You at the foul line. If you can't make that jump shot, that's level 1. If you can't, we don't need to guard you. Okay? If you can make that shot, now you're a level 2 player. Level 3 player is I can make that shot, I can go by you and get to the rim. And then there was level 4, which is Michael Jordan, is I can go by you, get to the rim, make contact, and still make the shot. So some guys are certain they're level 1 players or they're level 2 players against certain types of teams. But when they play that really weak team, they could be a level 4 player. And then we play, I don't know, the toughest team in the league. And all of a sudden that guy who was having this great game the game before became very average. Because the level of athleticism just changed dramatically.
and it depended on practice. Because practice was like playing the best team, even though we didn't have the best guys, but it was hard, and we had contact, and it was really challenging.
Well, you can put 6 guys against 5, you can put 7 against 5, and no matter how bad the 7 are, they're still gonna cause chaos.
Right. When it was a bunch of head cases on the team, then when we would play the level 2 team, well, we would drop to them.
Yeah.
Level 4, we'd elevate. Well, that's a coaching issue and just a
Right.
motivation issue, so.
Very good. Any other questions?
I have a question about age as far as kids and them starting like strength related. My boys are like 9, 8, 9, 10, and they do a lot of different sports. They don't, I mean, they're super active, strong kids, but they don't, they've never done any sort of like
weightlifting.
train. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, is that enough? Like my one little one, he just injured his knee. And so the guys, the ortho said, just don't do sports for the next couple weeks. I don't know if that's good, but good advice, but they're just really active. But I'm like, are you injuring, like, would it be better for kids that age to start something like middle school? Like, or are you like,
Yeah.
that's not necessary?
It's hard to get motivation under 10.
That's kind of what, okay.
So if they're driven,
It's hard to get motivation sometimes from like
Under
from
50.
18.
Yeah, I mean, from these girls who want to be starting, you're like, but you're not.
You're not doing it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
you're not gonna be starting because you haven't put the time in. So under
Well,
10,
Their saving grace is that nobody else is either.
No,
but I mean, that's the thing, like-
Actually, I will say
there's
this year.
20%.
Right,
Yeah,
it's the
and
20,
it's
it's
are
it's
working hard.
even for some of the non-motivated ones, their saving grace is that the 60-70% of the rest of their team also isn't motivated,
Yeah.
so they still look good compared
it's
to the rest of their
relative.
team.
relative,
Wade
right.
is lucking out, guys. We have 2 national volleyball players on our varsity team this year.
Are you serious?
2.
I think it's just-
And we have 3 national volleyball players on in our